The first thing Clara Bennett noticed was that none of the four men tied beneath the cottonwood had weapons. The second was that one of them might already be dead. At 19, Clara had been riding home through Miller's Canyon with an empty medicine satchel when a low sound stopped her mare. Not a shout, a breath dragged through clenched teeth. She dismounted. Four Apache men sat against a tree with their wrists bound behind them. One lay unconscious. Another, a broad-shouldered man with blood darkening his right shoulder, watched Clara as if deciding whether she was rescue or another danger. She looked up the canyon. No riders, no wagon, only fresh hoof prints leading away. Clara drew the small knife from her belt. The wounded man stiffened. "Hold still," she said, kneeling behind him. "I can help." His English came slowly. "If you cut rope, men come back." Clara saw the raw skin beneath the knots. "Then we'd better be gone before they do." The knife slipped beneath the rope. One cut, then another. The man's hands came free, but instead of reaching for Clara, he crawled toward the unconscious prisoner. She cut the others loose. "My name is Clara." The wounded man touched his chest. "Taza." She tore a strip from the clean cloth in her satchel and pressed it against his shoulder. Clara had watched her mother dress enough ranch injuries to know the bullet had passed through flesh without striking bone. A younger man suddenly raised his head and pointed toward the canyon mouth. Hoofbeats. Far away, but coming closer. Taza forced himself upright. Clara's stomach tightened. Her mother had warned her that trouble in Arizona territory rarely announced which side was telling the truth. After Clara's father had been killed protecting a freight wagon, Margaret Bennett had given her daughter one rule above all others: come home alive. But Clara remembered something else her father had said before that final trip. A wounded man is a wounded man before he is anything else. She grabbed Taza's arm. "Can you ride?" He nodded. "There's an old line shack less than 2 miles from here." The unconscious man could not sit a saddle alone, so Clara helped secure him behind one of the others. Taza took her mare only after she insisted. Clara mounted a loose pack horse tethered farther up the canyon. The hoofbeats grew louder. They rode. The abandoned Bennett Line shack stood hidden behind a shelf of red stone. Its roof sagged, but riders on the main trail could pass without seeing it. Inside, Clara barred the door. For several minutes, nobody spoke. Taza's companions checked the windows and the ground outside. They moved like hunted men, not raiders enjoying an escape. That bothered Clara. So, did what she did not see. No stolen saddlebags. No rifles. No jewelry. No trade goods. Nothing matched the story she had heard that morning about Apache thieves attacking freight lines. Taza sat against the wall, while Clara replaced the cloth on his shoulder. Something metallic slipped from inside his shirt and struck the floor. Clara picked it up. A stamped brass freight badge. She knew the mark. Crow Transport Company. Silas Crow controlled much of the freight traffic through the valley. That morning, a storekeeper had told Clara that Crow's men were hunting for Apache killers near Miller's Canyon. Yet one of those hunted men carried Crow property. Clara looked at Taza. "Where did you get this?" His expression closed. Before he could answer, a shadow crossed the crack beneath the door. Everyone froze. A horse snorted outside. Then a man's voice drifted through the stone hollow. "Trackson somewhere around here." Clara closed her hand around the brass badge. Another rider answered, closer this time. "Find the girl, too. Crow wants to know what she saw." The metal suddenly felt cold in Clara's palm. Until that moment, she had believed she had stumbled upon 4 prisoners. Now she understood something far worse. Whoever had tied them to that tree already knew her name. Clara waited until the riders had passed before she dared breathe again. For nearly an hour, she and the 4 men remained inside the lined shack. Taz's companions watched the windows while Clara kept pressure on his shoulder. Outside, hoofbeats circled once, then faded toward the south trail. Only then did Taza speak. "You go home." Clara stared at him. "And leave you here?" "You have mother." The fact that he knew tightened her stomach. "The men who caught us talked," Taza said. "They said Bennett Ranch. Said girl ride alone." Clara looked at the brass Crow badge in her hand. Crow's men had not merely noticed her. They had been watching her. She left food, water, and bandages. Before riding away, she pointed toward the ridge. "Stay here until dark. If anyone comes saying my name, don't trust them unless Elias Ward is with me." By the time Clara reached the Bennett Ranch, the porch lamp was burning. Margaret Bennett stood in the doorway. She did not call out. She simply looked at the blood on Clara's sleeve. "What happened?" Clara dismounted. "Mama, I need you to listen before you get angry." Margaret's face changed. "I found 4 men tied up in Miller's Canyon." Her mother's eyes closed. "No, they were wounded. Tell me you rode away." Clara said nothing. Margaret stepped off the porch. "Tell me you rode away." "I cut them loose." Margaret gripped the porch rail. "Do you know what happened in town today? Silas Crow came in before noon. Said 4 Apache men murdered 2 freight drivers and escaped. He's offering money to anyone who finds them." "They didn't escape." Margaret looked at her. "They were tied to a tree." Clara pulled out the brass badge. "And one of them had this." Margaret recognized the Crow stamp immediately. Fear replaced anger. "Where are they?" "Safe." "Where, Clara?" "I can't tell you. If Crow asks, you need to be able to say you don't know." Margaret stared at her daughter, then pulled her inside. "We pack tonight." Clara blinked. "What?" "We take what fits in the wagon. We leave before sunrise. This is our ranch. It is dirt and timber. You are my daughter." Clara's voice softened. "They're not running from justice, Mama. They're running from him." Margaret turned toward the mantel, where the photograph of Thomas Bennett stood beside his freight wagon. "Your father thought doing the right thing would protect him, too." That silenced Clara. Margaret touched the frame. "I buried one person I loved because he believed courage could outrun bullets. I will not bury another." Then came 3 knocks at the door. Slow, heavy, certain. "Mrs. Bennett?" A man called. "Silas Crow." She opened the door only as far as the chain allowed. Crow stood on the porch with 6 armed riders behind him, dressed too neatly for a man who claimed to have spent the afternoon searching canyons. "Evening, Margaret. Your girl been riding near Miller's Canyon today." Margaret did not hesitate. She took medicine to the Wilkins place and came straight home. Crow's eyes shifted past her. Clara stepped into view. "That's right." He studied her dusty clothes, then paused on a faint bloodstain near her cuff. "Rough ride." "My mare spooked." Crow nodded. His gaze moved to the sideboard, where Margaret kept clean bandages tied together with blue thread. One was missing. "Funny thing," Crow said. "One of my men found a strip of white cloth near the canyon trail." Margaret's hand tightened on the door. Crow smiled. "If those fugitives come near this ranch, you tell me." Margaret answered, "I'd tell the sheriff." Crow's smile disappeared. "Of course." He touched his hat and turned away. Clara watched the riders cross the yard. At the gate, Crow glanced back. Not at the house. At the barn, the well, the fields, as though he were already measuring what the Bennett ranch would be worth without the Bennetts on it. Margaret shut the door. We leave tonight. Clara looked at her father's photograph, then at the brass badge hidden in her fist. No. Her mother turned. If we run now, Crow wins before we even know what he's done. Outside, beyond the darkened window, a rider remained motionless on the ridge, watching the house. Clara waited until a rider on the ridge disappeared before saddling again. Margaret caught her at the barn. You are not going back alone. I'm getting Elias. 20 minutes later, Elias Ward opened his cabin door with a rifle in one hand. At 38, the former Army scout had the wary look of a man who had survived by distrusting easy stories. He listened until Clara showed him the Crow Freight badge. You cut 4 Apache prisoners loose. They were tied to a tree. You don't know what you stepped into. Clara met his stare. I knew exactly what I saw. 4 wounded men tied to a tree. Elias reached for his coat. Show me. They rode without lanterns. At the abandoned line shack, one of Taza's companions appeared from behind the rocks. Elias immediately lifted both hands away from his belt. Taza. After a pause, the door opened. Inside, fever began to shine across Taza's face. Elias examined his shoulder. Bullet passed through. That's good. Dirt in the wound isn't. Clara handed him boiled water and cloth. You said you knew some Apache. Some. We'll find out if it's enough. The conversation came in fragments of careful English, gestures, and a few Apache words Elias knew. Taza and the others had been traveling north when smoke drew them toward a freight station near Redwash. They found it burning. 2 wagon men lay on the ground, but the attackers were white men wearing Crow transport coats. Clara looked at Elias. You suspected him. I've suspected Crow of buying land from frightened families. That's different from proving he creates the fear. Taza continued. The attackers stole horses and scattered tracks toward Apache territory. One complained that the job should have been finished before sunrise. Then something fell from his coat. A small ledger. Clara leaned closer. A book. Taza nodded. Names. Money. Payments. Elias said. Taza pointed at the Crow badge on the table. He had taken it as proof, but before the 4 men could leave, Crow's riders surrounded them. They didn't kill you, Clara said. Taza shook his head. No, need bodies later. Elias went still. If 4 unarmed Apache men were found dead beside a burn freight station, Crow could claim he'd caught the killers. And dead men couldn't contradict him, Clara whispered. Taza looked at her. Girl cut rope. Her small act had not merely freed 4 strangers. It had broken the ending Crow had prepared for them. The youngest captive stirred on the bunk. Clara moved to help him drink. Taza watched her. You trust her, Elias said. She had knife, Taza replied. She cut rope, not throat. Clara laughed once. So, did Elias. The tension inside the shack shifted. They were no longer 4 nameless fugitives. They were injured men trying to reach home. Clara opened the bundle Margaret had packed despite wanting to flee. Cornbread, dried beef, 2 apples. Taza took half an apple and pushed the rest toward Clara. For you, she said. Share. She accepted it. Later, while she replaced his bandage, Taza asked, Father? Dead. He lowered his eyes. Mine too. Nothing more was needed. When Elias returned from checking the horses, Clara held up the badge. If the ledger proves Crow paid those men, we take it to Sheriff Pike. Maybe. Evidence only matters if the man holding it wants the truth. Before Clara could answer, Taza said, Book hidden. He pointed south. Near tree, not tree, split stone. Elias crouched. You hit it before they caught you? Taza nodded. Men search, not find. Clara stood. Then we get it. No, Elias said. That's the proof. And Miller's Canyon is the first place Crow will watch. Then we go tonight. Igo Kropka. Taza shook his head and made a cutting motion with 2 fingers. Girl, no tree. Girl, no place. Elias sighed. You've known him less than a day, and he's already helping you ignore me. Maybe he learns fast. Even Taza smiled. Before leaving, Clara handed him her father's old canteen. I'll bring it back, Taza said. You'd better. The words came out lightly, but Taza studied her before nodding. A promise had been made. Clara and Elias rode toward Miller's Canyon. Halfway there, Elias said, Crow has been buying river property for 2 years. How much? Enough that your ranch is becoming the hole in the middle of his map. Clara remembered Crow staring at their barn. Well, and fields. Measuring. Families sell when they think a war is coming. Elias continued. Land gets cheap when people are afraid to sleep in their own beds. Clara tightened her grip on the reins. So the freight attack wasn't just about blaming Apache. No. It was meant to frighten settlers into leaving. That's what I think. They reached the canyon. The cottonwood stood pale beneath the moon. Clara found the cut ropes, then remembered Taza's gesture. Not the tree. Split stone. She moved to a fractured boulder 10 yards away and slid her fingers into the crack. Leather touched her hand. She pulled out a small black ledger. Clara barely had time to smile before Elias whispered, Don't move. Across the canyon, a match flared. For 1 second, it illuminated a man's face. Then the flame vanished. They were not alone. The match died, but Elias had already seen enough. 2 riders, he whispered. Clara slipped the ledger beneath her coat. A voice came from the darkness. Miss Bennett? Crow's men. Elias moved between Clara and the trail. Ride north. I'm not leaving you. You're carrying the only thing they came for. The first shot struck stone near his boot. Elias fired above the riders, forcing their horses back. Clara kicked her mare forward and raced through the wash while another bullet snapped through brush behind her. Minutes later, Elias caught up. Still have it? Clara touched the ledger. Yes. They rode straight to Sheriff Pike. Beneath the jailhouse lamp, the sheriff turned the pages one by one. Names. Dates. Payments. Land parcels. One entry listed 3 Crow riders beside red wash freight action. Another contained the Bennett property. Beside it were 3 words. Acquire after evacuation. Clara stared at the page. He planned it. Pike closed the ledger. I need time. For what? Elias demanded. To verify this. A book can be forged. Men just shot at us for carrying it. Can you identify them? Elias could not. Pike looked at Clara. Go home. Don't leave the valley. By morning, the rumor reached town before she did. The Bennett girl helped Apache prisoners escape. The general store refused Margaret's flour order. A neighbor pulled his son away from Clara. Someone behind them muttered, Traitor. Margaret caught Clara's wrist. Not here. Across the street, Silas Crow stood outside the hotel speaking to frightened townsmen. When he saw Clara, his expression became almost gentle. Folks deserve to know whether Miss Bennett invited armed men into this valley. I invited no one. Then tell us where the 4 fugitives are. Clara stayed silent. Crow turned to crowd. See? She's protecting them. Sheriff Pike stepped between them. Enough. Then he looked at Clara. I need you inside. Margaret stiffened. Why? Questioning. Inside the jailhouse, Clara learned how quickly rumor could become a cage. Pike kept asking where Taza and the others were hidden. She refused. Near sunset, while the sheriff was outside with Elias, Crow entered. He stopped beyond the bars. For strangers aren't worth dying for. Clara stood. Maybe that's why you tied them up. You thought nobody would care. His pleasant expression vanished. You think that book saves you? Her pulse jumped. She had never told him they found it. Crow smiled when he saw she understood. People believe the story that lets them sleep at night. Tomorrow they'll believe you brought war to their doors. And when they run, you buy their land. Your mother understands survival. You should learn from her. He left before Pike returned. Elias arrived carrying a flattened bullet and a damaged bore from the red wash wagon. Same heavy rifle load Crow's guards carry. Pike examined it. That proves a weapon type, not a shooter. Then let her go. After a long silence, Pike unlocked the cell. She stays in town. Clara stepped out. No. Pike frowned. My mother is alone. Crow knows we found evidence. He won't wait. Elias looked at her. Neither would Clara. They rode hard for the Bennett Ranch. The glow appeared before the buildings did, orange against the night. Margaret was in the yard, dragging a bucket toward the barn. Clara. Flames climbed the stable wall. Clara jumped from the saddle and ran for the doors. Elias caught her. Roof's going. My mare. Margaret shoved a lead rope into Clara's hands. I got them out. A beam collapsed behind her. The three backed away as fire consumed the barn Clara's father had built. By midnight, only black posts remained. Margaret sat on an overturned trough, ash streaking her face. This is what I was afraid of. Clara had no answer. We can still leave, Margaret said. The old instinct rose inside her. Run. Pack before sunrise. Save her mother. Let someone stronger carry the truth. Then Clara looked at the place where the barn had stood. Crow had already taken safety away. Leaving would not bring it back. She knelt before Margaret. If I go, he gets the ranch. I don't care about the ranch. He gets the truth, too. Margaret's eyes filled. Your father stood for what he thought was right, and I buried him. I know. For years I thought courage was the thing that took him from us, Clara said. Maybe fear can take things, too. Elias approached. There may be another way. He had remembered a red wash freight driver who was rumored to have survived the attack and fled east. If he's alive, Elias said, the ledger gets a witness. Clara rose. Then we find him. Margaret stared at her daughter. You were ready to run before. I was. What changed? Clara looked at the burn barn. He stopped giving us anything safe to run toward. At dawn, the choice was no longer abstract. Clara could surrender the ledger and reveal Taza's hiding place, perhaps buying her mother temporary safety. Or she could keep the evidence and fight, knowing Crow might strike again. What would you choose when safety required betraying the people who trusted you? Clara tucked the ledger inside her coat. For the first time since this began, she was not waiting for Crow's next move. She was going to make one of her own. By noon, Clara, Elias, and Margaret had a plan. Elias would ride east to find the surviving freight driver. Margaret would keep the ledger hidden. Clara would stay near the ranch. The plan lasted less than an hour. One of Taza's companions galloped from the north and pointed toward the valley. Many riders. How many? He opened both hands, then shook his head. Many. The town alarm bell began ringing. Dust rose beyond the western ridge like smoke. Margaret came from the house. "Stay here," Clara said. Margaret grabbed her reins. "No more sending me somewhere safe while you ride toward danger." They rode together. By the time they reached town, men were climbing onto roofs. Sheriff Pike stood in the street, ordering everyone to hold fire. Silas Crow stood on the hotel porch. "There," he shouted. "I warned you." The first riders appeared. Then 20, 50. The line kept growing until hundreds of Apache riders spread across the horizon. Someone whispered, 300. Crow pointed at Clara. "This is what her treachery brought us. She freed their killers, and now they've come to town." A man grabbed Clara's arm. Margaret slapped his hand away. "Touch my daughter again, and you'll answer to me." Before the crowd could turn uglier, the riders stopped beyond rifle range. No one charged. No weapons were raised. 5 men separated from a line. The man in the center wore a strip of white cloth around his shoulder. Clara recognized it before she recognized his face. "Taza." He rode slowly into town. Crow reached for his revolver. A voice behind him said, "Don't." Elias Ward had returned. Beside him stood an older man with a scar across his jaw and one arm held stiff against his ribs. Crow's face changed. The stranger saw it. "Silas Crow," he said. Elias stepped forward. "This is Jonah Bell." He drove the red wash freight wagon. A murmur swept through the street. Crow said both drivers were dead. Jonah looked at Sheriff Pike. One was, "I wasn't." Crow laughed. He could be anybody. Jonah pointed at 2 of Crow's guards. Those 2 were at Red Washington. Neither man moved. Taza dismounted. He walked past the armed townsman and stopped in front of Clara. Then he reached inside his coat and placed a bundle at her feet. Letters. Receipts. A folded map. Red circles marked ranches along the river. The Bennett property was one of them. Taza spoke carefully. "Found with men who followed us." Jonah opened one letter. Crow ordered his foreman to frighten settlers south of Red Washington burn feed. Steal horses. Make it look like raids. Crow shouted, "You expect to trust them? Look around. 300 armed men." Taza turned toward the ridge. At his signal, the front riders lowered their rifles to ground. Then he looked back at Clara. "We came for girl." Silence. "For men return home," Taza continued. "Tell what she did, then word comes Crow hunts her." He touched the strip of Clara's bandage. "We come see she lives." They had crossed the valley not to attack, but because 4 men remembered the stranger who cut their ropes. Margaret placed a ledger in Sheriff Pike's hands. This time he opened it before everyone. He read names. Payments. Land parcels. Then the red wash entry. One of Crow's guards, Caleb Ross, slowly backed away. Pike looked at him. "Your name is here." Ross raised both hands. "I didn't kill the drivers." Crow spun toward him. Ross flinched. "I was paid to steal horses and burn the station. Crow said nobody was supposed to survive." The crowd erupted. Pike drew his revolver. "Silas, you're coming with me." For one breath, Crow appeared beaten. Then he smiled. "You arrest me, this town dies." He pulled a folded deed from his coat. "I own the Northwell, the freight yard, and half the winter grazing leases. Put me in chains and see how long your families last." The crowd quieted. Crow looked around with renewed confidence. Let me leave the valley. Everyone keeps working, or choose justice and lose everything I kept running. Clara understood his final weapon. Dependence. He had spent years making people believe survival required him. Sheriff Pike hesitated. Then Margaret stepped into the street. We managed before him. A rancher beside her nodded. So did my family. Jonah Bell said, I can testify. Another man called, we can haul our own freight. A woman near the store said, and share the Northwell until the court decides who truly owns it. One voice became 5, then 20. Crow's certainty disappeared. Clara stepped toward him. You made everyone afraid they'd lose everything without you. His eyes locked on hers. Maybe that's how you kept them from noticing what they were already losing because of you. Crow reached for his revolver. Margaret moved first. She stepped between him and Clara. Elias struck Crow's arm aside as the gun cleared leather. The revolver fell into the dirt. Sheriff Pike kicked it away. 2 townsmen seized Crow. Pike locked irons around his wrists. Silas Crow, you're under arrest. Crow looked toward the 300 riders as though they had defeated him. They had not. Crow finally lost when the frightened people around him chose the uncertain cost of truth over the familiar safety of fear. Taza picked up Crow's revolver and handed it grip first to Pike. Then he faced Clara. Safe now? Clara looked at her mother, Elias, Jonah, the townspeople, and the distant line of riders. The barn was still gone. The ranch was still damaged. Much remained to be repaired. But Crow was in chains. Clara smiled. Not everything is fixed. Taza nodded. No. She looked toward home. But now we get to fix it ourselves. 3 weeks after Silas Crow was taken away, the Bennett Ranch still smelled faintly of burned timber. But the silence was different. Neighbors who had crossed the street to avoid Clara now arrived carrying lumber, nails, feed, and awkward apologies. Jonah Bell gave his testimony to the territorial judge, and 2 of Crow's hired men confessed. The barn had to be rebuilt. Trust took longer. Clara preferred it that way. One morning, she found Margaret beside the new barn frame, holding Thomas Bennett's old photograph. I used to look at this and think it was a warning, Margaret said. What do you see now? Her mother studied the faded face. A man who made a choice, and a daughter who had to make her own. Margaret handed her the photograph. For years I was so afraid of losing you that I nearly taught you to lose yourself. Clara slipped an arm around her. You taught me how to come home. Margaret held her tighter. Across the yard, Elias was wrestling with a crooked roof beam. It would help, Clara called, if you stopped insulting the lumber. It started it. Margaret looked at him, then at Clara. You should probably rescue him. I've done enough rescuing. Elias heard that. That's gratitude for you. Their laughter carried across the yard where the burned barn had stood. Near noon, hoofbeats sounded from the northern trail. Margaret went still for half a second. Then she exhaled. Old habits. A small group of riders appeared beyond the gate. Taza rode in front. No army followed him this time. Only 3 companions and a young dark horse with 1 white foreleg. Clara smiled. Taza dismounted. His shoulder had healed, and the strip of Clara's bandage was tied neatly around his saddle horn. You kept that? Taza touched the cloth. Promise. Then he handed her the old canteen she had left with him in the line shack. I said I'd bring it back. So you did. He gestured toward the young horse. For you. Clara shook her head. I didn't help you for payment. It is not payment. He looked at the repaired fence, the new barn frame, Margaret beside Elias, then back at Clara. It is so you can ride home safely next time you save somebody. Clara laughed. Taza placed the reins in Clara's hand. Clara looked toward the distant cottonwoods. She remembered for men tied beneath one of them, ropes cutting their wrists, and Taza warning that the men would return if she freed them. Back then, kindness had seemed like a small thing. One blade, one bandage, one decision made before fear could talk her out of it. Taza followed her gaze. For men remembered your kindness, he said. Clara looked at him. He glanced toward the trail, where hundreds of riders had crossed the horizon. They were not the only ones. That evening, the Bennett table was no longer set for two. Elias stayed for supper. So did Taza and her companions. Margaret placed Thomas's photograph back on the mantel, but not like a warning from the past. She set it beside Clara's return canteen. Outside, the young horse shifted peacefully in the corral. The ranch crow had tried to empty was full of voices. Clara sat between her mother and people who had once been strangers. She finally understood that home was not the place fear convinced you to protect by hiding. Home was the place you chose to stand for, and the people who chose to stand beside you. Sometimes one act of dignity travels farther than the person who offers it will ever know. Clara saved 4 wounded strangers because she refused to let fear decide who deserved mercy, and that choice returned when she needed courage most. If you'd like another story from the trails of the American West, subscribe and leave a place open by the fire for the next one.